understand what place psychiatrists have in the marketplace now. You don't need a doctor, medical doctor, to go get a drug.
Yeah, but the
So,
narrative
I
is
don't know.
still like you do need the narrative is still there, like especially in Poland. You do need a doctor. You have a problem, go to a doctor. You have a psychological problem, issues, go to your doctor, and then he refers you to, yeah.
Okay, that's still the diagnosis. That's still pretty much happening here too, although it's changing. I mean, in the United States, but it's changing. Anyway, your question is great. I don't have an answer, but I don't see how a failed discipline, unless it reinvents itself, stays in the marketplace. At some point, you'll just say, why do we have these people?
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are like open questions. I know that there is difficult to answer. They are difficult to answer sometimes, but here's another.
No, they're great questions. I love the questions.
Okay, so here's another one. What do you think about the claim that all psychiatric disorders, including psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, are response to trauma or chronic stress, which are natural adaptive mechanisms of the body, and that labeling human psychological status as psychiatric diseases is an artificial construct without solid scientific evidence?
Well, I think that is too all-inclusive as an explanation for whether it be psychosis or mania or depression or whatever it may be. In large sense, I think we human beings are designed to be responsive to our environment.
Yeah.
And I mean, that we don't exist really except in response to environments, right? I mean, our emotions, our thoughts, etc., everything is in response to environment. And our brain changes in response to that environment, right?
We adapt to stimulus.
Yeah, we adapt.
Yeah.
So I do think that traumas can be one pathway to all these things. I certainly think that social stresses are a pathway to anxiety, or a pathway to depression. At the same time, what I resist here is I actually think there are many, many, many pathways to whether we call it psychosis or whatever these different psychiatric states are.
Yeah.
And there are disease states that can produce, for example, psychosis. So, for example, with people with Parkinson's disease, often they have psychotic symptoms. Now, we know that Parkinson's is caused by a loss of dopaminergic neurons in the basal ganglia, okay? That's a physical thing.
Yes.
Okay, that's an example of a physical cause of psychosis. We also have, remember when syphilis was untreated? Syphilis often ended in a type of psychotic end game. So it's clear that, by the way, when, if you go through the first half of the 20th century, a lot of origins of schizophrenia, those diagnoses sort of correlate with increase of lead in the environment from leaded gasoline. So there are toxins, of course, that can cause problems as well. So it's not all trauma. Because as part of being responsive to the environment, our environment is also are there chemicals in the environment? We got disease elements in the environment? In other words, where the psychiatric symptoms are secondary to some actual disease. Really shitty diet can be a problem. Never sleeping.
Gut-related issues, yeah. So the connection between the brain and the gut.
Yeah, so I sort of have this. We really need a humility around this, and that we do know that to suffer, to struggle, to go mad. I mean, read your Shakespeare, is within the human capacity, right? And I just think there are many, many causes. But I think sort of going what is after you is, do think of humans being responsive to their environments, and let's rather try to fix a molecule in the brain, try to see, create better environments for people, create better environments for children, create better environments for people working, with shitty jobs sometimes. So I don't agree with that sense that it's all trauma, it's all normal states. It's all of these things are within what we can see historically are possibilities of human experiences, right? Human states. But there can be many different sort of pathways to that. That's my feeling, including disease pathways.
Okay, including disease.
By the way, you know what in the United States is the biggest pathway now to schizophrenia diagnosis?
Like
It's use of other drugs.
yeah, the schizophrenia, like the drug induced, like you mean?
Yeah, like marijuana. You know,
Yeah.
marijuana is much more powerful than when I was a kid.
Yes.
And there's no question that if you do life stories of people who now have a diagnosis of a psychotic disorder,
Yes.
an extremely high percentage of them had other substances,
Like
either
drug induced. Yeah.
yeah, including SSRI induced and stuff,
Yeah.
but also illicit drugs. So now okay, that means you change the environment of what you're ingesting, right?
Yeah.
So my point is that's not just a trauma thing. That is, you took something that sort of fucked you up, and then what happens, of course, rather than being treated for drug-induced psychosis, you get treated for schizophrenia. You're put on other drugs, and now you're really screwed for life.
Yeah. It can sometimes, you know, to switch the flip the switch, and you're done. Yeah, because you overdo some stimulation of receptors, and yeah, I heard also many stories like of drug-induced psychotic episode, and it's like the most common factor of those conditions. And there's also like a study that open dialogue therapy, like if you speak with somebody with psychotic episode and they just, you know, let it all out, they start to speaking with a sense in the end of the conversation, because, you know, you have this, you know, all in your all the things that are inside you needs to come out, and then you will start speaking with sense. So it's like
when you finish the book, that's at the last part of the book you're reading.
Oh, really? Yeah,
in the solution section.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, yeah. I think. Oh, maybe this one is interesting question. In 1935, Moniz performed the first lobotomy. It fell out of favor 45 years later, just as psychiatric drugs were booming. Does a new method for treating mental disorders need to be introduced for the current system to become obsolete? So, I mean, does something new needs to pop up, like a lobotomy or like antidepressants for the current method to be, you know, obsolete?
Yeah, no, well, you're right, but do remember when the antipsychotics were first introduced. So Moniz wins the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1949. Okay, so it's seen as a very good thing. But then antipsychotics are brought introduced into the and really they're not antipsychotics, they're neuroleptics. They take hold of the nervous system. It's a different word. That's how they were described.
Yeah.
Well, they were initially praised for causing a chemical lobotomy. Okay. So when they were introduced, they weren't actually immediately a rejection of the old surgical lobotomy. They were seen as a continuation, but just as a chemical form. And then, however, as the lobotomy itself fell out of favor and began to be seen as a mutilating surgery, that's when they began to change the image of antipsychotics, neuroleptics, into drugs that fix the chemical imbalance, right?
Yeah.
That they were antipsychotics, like a bacterial drug. They were anti. But to your larger question is, yes, the history of psychiatry is where they're doing something and then something else comes along and they now look back and say, oh, that was a mistake.
Yeah.
So that's when they move on to something. So maybe we'll move on to something. I don't know. That's a possibility. It's really hard to understand because drugs have become such an ordinary part of life these days, right? Especially as you grow older. So, and the psychiatric drugs nevertheless fit into that larger medicating of ourselves. So I don't know, it's hard to predict the future, especially now that life is changing so rapidly with social media, AI.
Yeah, AI, exactly.
I just don't know where humans are going to. It's a very new environment for human beings.
For me, it feels like devolution, not evolution, but devolution. We're going down, like instead of going up, like as a human being, like we're being.
Obviously, in terms of our ability to focus and think, vocabularies, for example, in the United States, if you measure vocabularies of entering college freshmen compared to where they were 40 years ago, do you know how sharply our vocabularies have decreased? We use about half as many words today in ordinary conversation as people would be using 40 years ago. That's a sign of devolution, right?
Yes, yes, we are deteriorating. Like our cognitive functions, our prefrontal lobes are shrinking because we don't use them. Like if you don't use it, you lose it. Like Lamarckism, like you know.
Yeah.
So.
And I don't know how it is in Poland, but the amount of people who read books, especially growing up, has gone way down.
Yes.
We have kids who hardly
we collect books. We don't read books. I buy book and I put it on the shelf. And, oh, I have this nice book, but I haven't finished yet because my attention span is like, you know, this is actually the first book I will read from the first page to the last page within like few years because I lost my attention span. It's shrinking.
It's the same as in the United States. So that's telling you of a devolution in capacity to think and make sense of the world.
And I saw the interview with with Polish kids from the 60s or 70s. Their verbal fluency were way higher. The social connection, social interactions. Right now we do have interactions with mobile phone, not with human beings. So it's like
it's a step backwards for sure.
Step backwards for people. Yeah, it's a long story, but the point is like that we are devolving and well, I have another one. Like in the 1970s, antidepressants heavily competed with psychedelics for a place in the pharmaceutical market, but ultimately lost under Reagan. Do you think that the regulation continued to the current epidemic of antidepressants use?
Yes.
Or do you think the regulation contributed to the current epidemic of antidepressants use?
Another good question.
I mean, I took both. I took LSD and I took antidepressants. And I should have stayed with LSD instead of taking antidepressants.
Yeah, I took LSD when I was a kid too.
Yeah, profound experience. And
so you're asking me if the regulation of those drugs contributed to the use of antidepressants?
Yes.
Yeah.
They were prohibited, and then the antidepressants showed up on the market simultaneously.
Yeah, no, I don't really think so. I think what happened is, well, I mean, there was a sense within society that there are bad drugs and then there are good drugs. So LSD was seen as a bad drug. Marijuana was seen as a bad drug. Yeah. And now we get, and by the 70s, actually the benzodiazepines were being seen as bad drugs, so they were addictive. So really what antidepressants were described in a different manner in order to replace the benzodiazepines. Okay, that was part of that story. Yeah, well, listen, I think the problem is precisely that they did come under this idea that these were the good drugs. There's those bad drugs that change you for the worse and make you go crazy, and now we have these good drugs. Now it's an artificial thing, and you can see a paper by Stephen Hyman, who was the director of the NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health. He says, listen, all these drugs, whether illicit or illicit, in other words, illegal or prescribed, they all perturb normal neurotransmitter function. And your brain, goes through a compensatory response. Now, here's one of the good things about LSD. You generally didn't take it every day.
Yeah, it doesn't, because it triggers tachyphylaxia. It binds to receptor. It doesn't cause reuptake. It doesn't inhibit the reuptake mechanism. It works in different way. It binds to receptors, and then the drugs wears off after 60 minutes, and you have this increased stimulation of the serotonergic system. That's why you get the high from it. It doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's why it goes away. Yeah, but listen, on the other thing is, though, very few people took LSD on a daily basis.
Yeah,
you see what I'm saying?
You can't, and you are
okay. Yeah. So my point is, once drugs got seen as good drugs, Then now you're perturbing your system on a regular basis, constant basis. You're almost never letting your system reset.
So they have more profitable mechanism because you need to take it on daily basis to, be saturated. So that they manufacture the drug that you need to do, take it, pop a pill every day instead of, take it once a year or once a month, like an acid or shrooms. Yeah. So maybe.
Yeah. Listen, and that fits a marketing story that you want. You want your people to take. If I'm a pharmaceutical company, I don't want them to take my drug once every year. I want them to take it every day. So this was a story that fit the building of a market.
Yeah. Okay. And they, decrease the visual side effects with some mood uplifting side effects, and yeah, makes sense to me. Like, but because it's way more difficult to profit from psychedelics because you cannot, you feel saturated. Like after the trip, you feel, okay, I had a trip and it's enough. I don't need another one because, But here's another, like does introducing newer, more selective drugs to the market in response to the side effects of older generation drugs make any sense?
No, it's just a continuation of the same.
Like,
It's just a new marketing thing. One of the ironies is once drugs go off patent and you have generic competitions, now the drug companies have to invent a new drug to replace the old drug that they can sell for a huge markup. So this is when you get this moment, well, maybe those old drugs aren't so good. Now, my favorite story about this was related to an antidepressant. When I guess it was Abilify, or maybe Seroquel, was being marketed in the US, we started, because you can advertise on TV for drugs in the United States. So we started hearing in the advertisements for Seroquel to be used for people with depression was, listen, antidepressants only work for about 25% of people. They were all of a sudden now saying, like, these drugs really don't work. Now you got to take Seroquel. But we never heard that. We never heard they only work by 25% when they were selling the, SSRI antidepressants. I don't know if I'm answering your question. What was the question again? I don't think I answered your question.
Does introducing newer, more selective drugs in response to the side effects of current generation?
Okay, yeah. Listen, even the idea that they're more selective is bullshit.
Yeah, it's bullshit. Yeah, I feel that way. Like there are like right now we have this issue with tardive dyskinesia, and there is new drug, like I forgot the name, but there's like new drug that will treat the condition that were caused by another. So it's like, downward spiral. So I think it's self-explanatory. But
the new drug that is going to be used to treat tardive dyskinesia. Now think about this. You have one drug that causes this degeneration of motor control.
Yes,
that's a bad thing to do.
Of course.
But instead of taking that drug away, you're going to give another drug that supposedly slows that that deterioration. But that new drug, what it does is it impairs cognition even further.
Yes.
And that new drug has its own sort of side effects.
Yeah.
So it's a type of insanity.
It's like a you will get prescription for Alzheimer's, like memantine or piracetam, because you will have cognitive impairment due to the previous drug, and then you will be prescribed some other stuff.
Rather than like, well, maybe we shouldn't be prescribing these drugs in the first place if they give people tardive dyskinesia.
Yeah, of course, and like the logic behind it is like, and it's still working. And
have you ever been into a group home of people who've been on antipsychotics for 30 years?
I met some, like when I had practitioners during my studies during neurobiology. I was in the psych ward as a student, and I saw them, and it was like zombified people, like with.
But it's zombified people that are jerking around, really destroyed human beings is the only way to put it.
Yes, I remember the when they were going to the cafeteria or something, like in the line, and they were like like in the movies, and it wasn't them, it was just drug induced state. So
right, but it's perceived as that this is what schizophrenia is. Oh, you shuffle along. Yeah, no, it's not them.
I'm from the medical field because I was studying in the medical faculty in Silesia in Katowice in Poland, and I know some doctors, and he like told me one time when we have aggressive patient, I put him instantly on haloperidol to shut the fuck up. And, you know, they just don't care. They don't care about, oh, he will have some side effects. He will might be damaged for life. But he just, they only, like, you know, it's you get adjusted to some things when you are working in a medical field, and you don't treat people like with respect anymore sometimes, unfortunately. And they, you know, the narrative is this just to for people to be calm, whatever it takes. So they are billing instantly polydrugged at those psych wards, and so
Sure.
and I think the same happens in the United States, right? That they are.
Yeah, at least they're being honest. They're just giving the drugs to shut them the fuck up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
that's true. That's why they're giving them Haldol.
yeah.
Get them to shut the fuck up.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
true.
Yeah, and
But at least that's honest.
yeah, it's yeah. Well, he was honest with me, but you know, the narrative with patients is quite different. Like, oh, we'll give you something to calm your nerves, but you know, no, the point is way different. But yeah, so could understanding the etiology and pathogenic mechanism of protracted withdrawal or PSSD from psychiatric drugs turn out to be the final argument for banning these drugs?
That the protracted withdrawal becomes the argument for banning the drugs.
Yeah, the
That's
understanding of etiology and pathomechanism, because right now we don't know what's happening in the brain.
No, we don't know.
We don't know. Yeah.
We don't know at all why these. What you're seeing is that there's been a dysregulation of the nervous system. That's the best way to describe it.
Yes, I vote for that. Or prolonged receptor desensitization, or some epigenetic changes. We have some, you know, clues, but no, nothing. But I
So listen, that's a story of, nevertheless, just instead of thinking of the drugs as helpful, let's imagine we conceive of drugs that dysregulate the nervous system. Not the drugs as biological agents. Let's say, imagine they were an infectious agent. And even after your body cleared the infectious agent, so now you no longer see the infectious agent, but you have these residual symptoms, right? That would be like, oh my God, this is a really problematic, you know, virus or bacterial agent. And by the way, we have, you know, long COVID. We talk about long COVID. Even after you've gotten rid of the virus, you still have these neurological symptoms. Now that's seen as a really bad thing. Well, why isn't protracted withdrawal symptoms that don't go away even after a year, 2 years? Some of these are considered permanent. Yeah. Why isn't that considered a really bad thing? But that's really a good analogy here is that when we shouldn't be talking about protracted withdrawal symptoms. The reason we shouldn't be protected because it makes it seem like, oh, this is just because the drug maybe is leaving very slowly and you're still adjusting to everything in your body. What we should be talking about, if people are still having these weird symptoms, you know, long time afterwards, there's some iatrogenic, you know what the word iatrogenic?
I know, iatrogenic, caused by the meds.
Yeah, there's some sort of iatrogenic injury and you're trying to recover from the injury. Yeah. Now, I saw something done there was a UK survey of people who, you know, had quit their drugs. And by and large, after 5 years, most felt that those enduring neurological problems had gone away. Most, but I think it was also a younger cohort. I don't think we may be talking about people who've been on the drugs for 20 years. But yeah, what clearly is happening, especially with SSRIs, and you talk to people who have, you know, neurological problems, sleeping problems. And, you know, there's even this talk that the drugs can introduce a tardive dysphoria, this permanent sort of inability to respond to the world.
Yes.
Those aren't withdrawal symptoms. Those are like neurological injury that persists.
Yeah. So the protracted withdrawal is a misnomer in that matter.
I think so, because it somehow makes it seem that it's related to going off the drug, this time of stopping the drug, as opposed to the drug-induced a neurological injury that may be permanent. Yeah. I mean, just go back to sexual dysfunction, Tomas. So while on the drug, you often have sexual dysfunction, right? There's a diminishment of sexual function. And then for a certain percentage of people, even after they taper from the drug, that sexual dysfunction or that dysphoric state remains. So it's not a withdrawal effect. It's that somehow the drug has had a direct effect on your system that responds to the world in a sexual manner.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm that kind of patient who has PSSD. Like it resolved to some point after 6 years, but it's still there. Right? It's not the same as it used to be. It's better, but like I did everything I could to resolve. I was stimulating BDNF like by physical activity. I went into ketosis to increase autophagy. I did everything I could to help my body recover from this injury. And I called it protracted withdrawal, but you're right. It felt like neurological damage from the medications and like dysregulation. It's difficult to to name it properly because.
See, I think if we rename it as a drug-induced injury,
Yeah.
then we can see that going on the drug right away is a problem.
Oh, of course, yeah, that we do need
drug.
paper. Yeah, we do need paper.
Whereas protracted withdrawal, it's like, well, then I'll just never withdraw.
Yeah, people have this mindset, to maybe I won't even quit those medicines. I can have this long-lasting effects, but it's like, it always leads to like, the high won't be here forever. Like the high, the ups will subside and the downs will pop up sooner or later. So it's like when I spoke with patients, with clients, they tell me that, like they because if you tell them that this is injury, that this is damage, that the neurological damage, you take away the hope, and it's difficult. It's tricky because on the one hand you feel like it's damaged, like something is devastated in your body, in your mind. But on the other hand, I did improve over the years, over the 6 years. I regained my cognitive abilities. I regained my emotions because I was just like emotionless. I was zombified, and I had this tardive dysphoria. Like my reward circuit was cut off. Like there was no dopamine releasing during any kind of pleasure activity, like jogging, running, whatever. But it does gets better. So. Naming it injury, it's also
well. All I can say is yes, I understand that, and hope is important. Yeah. But you can recover from neurological injuries. The body can heal.
To some point, to some point, you want if you have had a stroke, it does get better, but your face still will be it's.
Yeah, I guess the point is to try to say a milder one you can heal from eventually.
Yeah.
Anyway, I agree with you. This is very tricky. Yeah. You don't want to take hope away from people.
Yes.
Can I tell you something? This is really
sure
disturbing. So, we've had Matt in America for 12 years now, right? And it is a place you read about these problems and discuss these problems. We have had now 3 or 4 people who were commenters, active, I would communicate with them, who have committed suicide. And they committed suicide because they just thought, I'll never get better. I'm going to be dysphoric the rest of my life. And so they literally lost all hope they could really get a life back. So you're right about, you don't want to rob people of hope. And every time it's happened, it's really crushing.
Yeah, and I was, I understand their narrative, because when I was at the very beginning of the withdrawal, I was convinced that this is permanent, that there is no hope. I had suicide attempt, I had all of this, and I was taking away the hope from others and when I came back after a few years saying, hey, I'm better, I was instantly gaslighted. Oh, it's not true, you were lucky, you were this, and this is difficult to talk with these people, to give them hope, because they are so hopeless. They don't they have this tunnel thinking, and they don't think straight in this protracted withdrawal or injury, whatever you call it. So it's difficult. I lost also many people when I was talking with them on the webcam, just like with you, that I found out that, Benjamin is no more, another guy is no more, because he couldn't make it, and he was like just the guy like you, damaged from sertraline, and it's difficult to process it. But sometimes you need to accept something, like if you lose your leg, you need to you know, it's easier to accept the loss when it affects only part of your life. Like if you have one leg, you can learn how to cope with it. But if you lost your humanities, you know, it's something that it's unacceptable, you know, to cope with. So it's difficult. It's a fragile subject to talk about. And what sparked your interest in the topic of antidepressants? Because this is what bothers me. Like, how did you get so involved into this? Because you're an expert, and what makes, because you're a journalist, right? And you're a publisher for medical field. And what sparked the interest in the topic of antidepressants for you?
So my interest in this all came about in a roundabout manner, and it did come from a journalistic experience.
Okay.
So I had no interest in psychiatry, okay? You know, when I was working for a newspaper. What happened though was, and I was covering medicine and science. That was my beat for a long time. I did take a brief period where I was director of publications at Harvard Medical School. And this was in the 90s, and when there was a lot of talk about evidence-based medicine. So doctors could be deluded about their therapies. So that planted the seed to say that, like, you couldn't just trust doctors what they say they know, but you had to go to the research literature. Anyway, now then I was doing a series for the Boston Globe, okay? And it was about abuses of psychiatric patients in research settings. But the foil for this, the context for this series, was a conventional understanding that these drugs fix chemical imbalances in the brain. So, for example, one of the things we looked at and said was unethical were studies in which they had withdrawn antipsychotics from schizophrenia patients to see how quickly they would relapse. And we said, that's unethical because these drugs are like insulin for diabetes. You would never withdraw insulin from a diabetic to see if, you know, what happened to them. So that series for the Boston Globe got a lot of attention, and it was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Public Service, which is the #1 prize in American journalism.
Yeah.
However, by the time that series was published, I had some questions about what I had been told, including that these drugs fix chemical imbalances in the brain, okay? So I got a contract to write a book that became Mad in America. And the first thing I wanted to do was look at the research that told of that they had found that too much dopamine was the cause of schizophrenia, or too little serotonin was the cause of depression. And what I was told when I then called up the experts, the very same experts who had told me that story, was that, oh, well, we didn't actually find that. What we found, it's just a metaphor, like insulin for diabetes. And I said, I understand that it's like a metaphor, but where did you find that people with depression had too little serotonin? And they said, we didn't really find that. How about people with schizophrenia having too much dopamine? We didn't really find that. So at that moment, as a journalist, I realized our society was sort of organizing itself, its thinking, around a false story, about a story that was being. And then I asked, well, why do you tell people this? Oh, because it gets them to take the drugs, and we know the drugs are good for people. Well, a journalist is not supposed to be carrying the water of a profession and lying to the public.
Yeah.
So basically, I got into it like, okay, well, what is the science telling us? Now, Mad in America tells a long history of the treatment of the mentally ill. And the reason I eventually told the history is because clearly this was a betrayal of people. To say, initially, I was just talking about the quote, the mad psychotic patients in Mad in America, but telling them that they had this problem when they didn't have it, that's a betrayal. And then I wanted to see, well, how have we treated people called mad since, you know, since the United States became a country? And what you see, of course, is that there's all sorts of crazy thoughts about the mad, and they're always justifying whatever they're doing, whatever treatment they're doing. But anyway, my whole interest in this is a journalistic one, is that A, you shouldn't be lying to people. That's number one. And number two, it is a deception that has caused great harm. The second thing. And then once you get to that understanding, the question is then, well, what are the forces that have driven this story? And clearly the forces are guild impulses, psychiatry to raise its prestige, and it's pharmaceutical money. So it's a marketing story. It's a branding story. It's not a medical story. And the reason I've stayed with it, I've now written 3 books related to this. I wrote a couple of other books, is because it's changed our society. It's changed how we raise our kids. It's changed how we think about ourselves. It's changed our sense of resilience. I mean, it's really harmed society after society. And the most amazing thing is, this shit was promoted around the world, wherever I go. I mean, I recently was at a conference in India, not in person, by Zoom, and the conference there was all about fixing chemical imbalances and stuff. I'm going to Brazil in December. It's all about fixing chemical imbalances there. So Poland. We recently, I'm going to Slovenia after this. After I go from Warsaw, I'm going to Slovenia to give a couple talks. It's about chemical imbalances there. They sold this story around the world.
And why did they stopped? Like the time has stopped here, and it's like
it has stopped. This is what I don't understand. You want to hear something amazing? When I was after this book first was published in 2010, I was asked to give a presentation at a grand rounds at Massachusetts General Hospital, which is a Harvard hospital, and it's one of the psychiatric department that gets more money almost than any psychiatric department in the country. Okay, and they invited me in essence to crush me. The whole point was to crush me. And one of the things they said is, "You lied about us. You said we believe in chemical imbalances." I didn't actually say it, but they said, we knew that idea was discarded 25 years ago. Now, this is 2010. And I said, you're right. It was discarded 25 years ago, but you forgot to tell the public. And all the heads went like this. So in essence, I said, you've been lying for 25 years because your own research found it not to be true. But here it is. 2024. Do you know that the American Psychiatric Association's own textbook in 1999 declared the low serotonin theory dead? Said, we've investigated this. It just didn't happen. That's 1999, 25 years ago. And you're still hearing about it in Poland, in Serbia, and around the world. It's mind-boggling. And the doctors believe it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're confident about it, that this is how it works. Yeah, and it also affects, like, do you know there's medication spellbinding, the term that, like, where patient is not aware of the consequences, and it all stuck up on this chemical imbalance here, because those patients are, it's difficult for them even to convince them that something might be wrong, because they are so out of place, and the doctors confirms it, and they are difficult to even talk openly about it, because I met many people on those medications, and it's impossible for me to even try to start the conversation about, well, these drugs might have negative effects if you take them for no way to convince them. So it's
people want to believe in them for sure.
No, they won't believe, and if they are in the
they want to believe in the drugs, they want to believe in the miracle story.
Yes, but when they are in the withdrawal, the narrative is like that. Oh, I need to go back to doctor, and he will reinstate the drug, and then you're like lifetimer. And there is no way, I tried many, like my closest friend were on the meds, and I tried to say, hey, this drug are doing no good for you. They are affecting your mood in a bad way, your relationship, whatever. And he was like, what should I do? When I quit them, I get a recurring depression or anxiety. And no, it's not a depression. It's like anxiety. It's withdrawal from this meds, and it's like there is no space for even for discussion. And it's so frustrating that they are like so many things around this that make it so difficult to even openly talk about it, because people are defending those drugs like a drug addict defending their dose of cocaine or whatever. So because despite huge progress in raising awareness over the last decade, it still seems like we are stuck. like I have another one. Like, are expectations that big pharma will admit guilt in any way realistic? Like, do you think that they will eventually say, "Hey, we made a mistake," like with thalidomide or whatever? So
No, they'll just move on to something else.
yeah, okay. So they were like,
They'll
okay,
never made a mistake.
okay, never.
They'll admit that the drugs have limitations.
Okay. Yeah, the narrative. Like, there is like this guy Joseph with During, like he's making this funny role about how big pharma works. I think it might be quite accurate. I don't know the exact system like in US, but in Poland, like nobody talks about it. And yeah, it's and do you think that like in Europe, for like what would have to happen in Europe for the narrative around the psychiatry to have any chance of changing? Like, because in Europe it's a little bit different. Like, we have different drug regulating system, and you know.
There's one country now where there is a vigorous debate, and there's two countries actually, one in Europe and one in the Mideast. In Norway, for example, there is a vigorous debate about the merits of psychiatric drugs. And, you know, for a time, the government itself came to the conclusion we should be offering people medication-free treatment. In other words, even in hospital, if they didn't want to take the drugs, they should still get treatment. Now, that came about for two reasons. One was there was user groups, a very strong user group within Norwegian society. There is built into the society the sense that ordinary people should have a voice. So even within hospitals, they have to have patient boards, advisory boards made of patients. So there's this this countrywide sense is that you should be listening to patients. And the user groups in Norway basically said, you know, many of us don't like these drugs. We want a chance to get some treatment and care and find some safe spaces without having to go on drugs. Now, as that initiative was being promoted, they did bring me over a number of times, the user groups, to speak at public forums and so. And I think the government became convinced that there was a rationale for this. There was some medical rationale for not taking drugs. Now that initiative is being beaten back by Norwegian psychiatry, which is very biological. However, you know, we have a MAD in Norway. That's one of our affiliates. And those affiliates will tell you that within Norwegian society, there's all sorts of questioning of the psychiatric drugs, all sorts of questioning of that model of thinking. So they're, and by the way, MAD in Norway has a higher per capita readership than we do in the United States, in MAD in America. So within that country now, it is very much being debated whether the psychiatric drugs are doing more harm than good. That's one country. Now, I will say that Norwegian psychiatry is still very powerful. It's very biologically oriented. And so I don't know who's really going to win that debate, so to speak. I don't know which way it's going to go. Oddly enough, the other place where that debate really arose was in Israel. Now, the reason it arose in Israel is because, so forget the politics for a second of Israel. You know, everyone has to serve in the military there, okay? And basically it happens after they're 18. So rather than go to college, they have to serve a year in the military. And then after that year of service, often, this was when they weren't in times of war, they would go on a year of sort of wandering. And a lot of them would do drugs. And so many people, ex-service members, were ending up psychotic in India in place that Israel actually set up extraction teams to bring these people back home. So now they bring them back home and they're psychotic, but they're viewed through the lens of, oh, these are ex-service members that were sort of fucked up by their service and also drugs. So they didn't really conceive of them as schizophrenic, even though they were psychotic. And therefore, when there was one psychiatrist who began to want to open a Satyria house, which was based on a model in the United States from the 1970s that sort of tried to make limited use of the drugs. It got support from the health ministry. And now all of a sudden there's a number of these, either stabilization houses, et cetera. Now, again, when I went there they brought me there to speak many times in order to support this idea that they should have these type of houses. There were Israeli psychiatrists who wanted, that just, they would be invited to the same debates and they would speak so negatively of me, right? It would be really rough. But nevertheless, there has been an ongoing reconception of things, and there's a number of these, quote, stabilization houses, or psychiatria houses across the country, and they get support, financial support from the National Health Service. So those are two countries where the national discourse has changed somewhat, and it is changing in the United States too. The national discourse certainly has a lot more comments now about people being harmed by these drugs and withdrawal being a problem, that sort of thing. Did I answer your question?
Yes, in a long way, but yeah, thank you for the long answer. But yeah, I wish, I'm still thinking, how can I contribute, like here in Poland, like as we spoke, but maybe one day we will launch this Met in America, like Met in Poland affiliate, and we can do something about it, because I already reached out many of like Polish influencers, but they are talking about depression and stuff, but this is the only way I can do this, because speaking with doctors is like, no way, like they are, I have been even like threatened with a lawsuit when I offered in Polish forum about depression, that I help people tapering antidepressants and help going through the protracted withdrawal process, and they say, oh, you're not a doctor, how can you do this? I contacted our Department of Justice here in Poland, blah 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 blah. So it's like slippery slope. It's a risky territory,
I can see that.
I can, that's why I'm so, I respect you so much for doing this, because you need to stand against the pharmacy, the doctors. And I did you get any lawsuit or any kind of threats during the process, or not really?
No, I did. Not lawsuits.
Okay.
There was a couple of times when I was threatened by a drug company. Long story. With a couple lawsuits, but this actually was related to something else. For 4 years, I had co-founded a publishing company that looked at clinical trials of new drugs, not just psychiatric drugs, anything. This was from 1994 to 1998, and we wrote a couple of stories about basically how drug companies were biasing their trials in order to make the drugs look good, and also to make money, on the stock market and all. And we got threatened with a couple of lawsuits for that, but nothing ever happened with them. I have been, there have been campaigns against me to discredit me.
Whole campaigns, like, oh.
Yeah, there have been, and it's funny. I had someone working for a drug company as in their media department when my first book came out, and they were working. Well, they actually were a company that provided consulting services to a number of pharmaceutical companies. So he was in a meeting with Eli Lilly, and the question came up. This was after Mad in America was published. What are we going to do about Bob Whitaker? Literally came up as a thing, and the answer was, well, we're working on that. In other words, to destroy his reputation. And so what you'll see, there was like planted things in the newspapers about how I'm like no longer a good journalist, stuff like that. There was a campaign too by lawyers that was launched. Whenever I would be invited to speak, the lawyers would contact the organization that was, inviting me, and they would be threatened with a lawsuit for misusing their funds, that sort of thing. But that said, yeah, so those sort of things have happened. I did get a couple. There was a couple times I got threatened, like you should worry about the safety of your kids.
Oh, so you did something, and it was by
So they knew I had kids, but nothing's ever been done, you know. I mean, it's just basically tried to discredit my my credibility as a journalist.
credibility. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah, totally understand. It's good that nothing bad happened like to you, like in the process. So no friends, like
It's just attacks on your credibility.
yeah,
But here's the thing, Tomas.
hmm?
So I've been accused of bias, of cherry picking data and misciting stuff, but they never actually have given any examples. This is 20 years, and especially it's 14 years since Anatomy of an Epidemic was published. I've never had anyone actually say you misquoted me. I've never actually had anyone come out and say, here's where you miscited the data of my research. Never has happened, not once.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, they may have criticized me for these things, but the actual researchers have never said he got our data wrong.
Yeah, it only proves a point, right? That's your
Yeah. And if they did have other data, if I had got it wrong, they would point it out, right?
yeah.
And here's the other thing is the narrative in the United States has shifted. So it used to be, oh, antipsychotics, of course they provide a long-term benefit. It's now admitted in the United States by leading researchers, there's no evidence that antipsychotics provide a leading benefit. And there is now more and more acceptance that antidepressants may worsen the long-term course of depression.
There is a study like comparing running therapy compared to antidepressants use, and you know they are the results from the just simply jogging outcomes the positive effects of antidepressants. So there is no single. I was also like searching for any kind of hard evidence that antidepressants do any positive outcome for the patients, but no way you can find.
Not long term, you can't find it.
Yeah, long term.
You just can't find it.
And short term is this, like, you know, you are being, for a short time you're being drugged and you like hit or miss. Maybe it won't do long lasting harm, maybe it will, maybe it won't. So
that's a good way to describe the short term, hit or miss.
But yeah, buy the ticket, take the ride, like, and see what happens. Like, it's a gambling. It's gambling with your own brain chemistry. So it's like,
yeah,
you know, I wish I could, you know, speak so openly with someone here in Poland, but I haven't found anyone yet. So,
well, hopefully, maybe if Mad in Poland gets started, you'll find a little community there.
Yeah, I will do my best if you, because I as I recall, you had like there are no funds for the Mad in Poland yet. So this is the issue. I don't know if you told me or somebody else, maybe Peter Simons, because I'm also emailing with him, but yeah, so yeah, I won't keep you much longer. It was, thank you for all this time that you.
Listen, it's really been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah.
We'll stay in touch, and I'll let you know about Mad in Poland. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, and can I post this video online and on my YouTube channel and share it with?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. That's great.
That's great. So thank you for that, and enjoy your time in Poland. And we're in touch, Robert. It was very nice.
I will. Thanks for the time.
For writing this marvelous book, and yeah, thank you.